Good evening. I am Trudy, and I'm here to bring you It's About Time, where we are going into the book of First Samuel. We'll be covering chapters 15 through 17 tonight. So it starts off where we have the battle against the Amalekites. That's actually going on right here. And the first verse starts off Samuel, who's also said to Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now, therefore, heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel. He ambushed him on the way when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." So here we have Samuel giving explicit directions to Saul, who is the king, and he is given direction on punishment. And this calls, uh, I would say, the big payback, if you really kind of would put it in context, because what happened as the children of Israel were exiting from Egypt, they were attacked by the Amalekites, and they were kind of unscrupulous how they actually attacked them, because they attacked them from the rear. And always when you're having uh, people coming through, that you're old, you're sick, and you're young, are in the back. So they basically took advantage of the situation, and they caused great harm to the children of Israel. But God did not forget about what happened. And he had told them, and he said in his word, when he told Moses, he said, write this as a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, so that Joshua could actually record this, and that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under the heavens. And Moses built an altar and called its name, "The Lord is my banner." For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now, when we look at this happened 400 years prior that actually took place. But here we talk about, when I say the big payback comes back, over 400 years it took, but there was still where God's word still remained to be true. Even though it may take time for things to come through, that when God states his word, we can bank on it. We might not see it in our generation, but you can bank that it will come to pass. And then it goes on, it says that they were given explicit directions on what to do. Don't leave anybody, wipe out everyone, because God knows exactly what he's doing when he gives instructions. Our biggest thing in all of these things that we're going to learn in these lessons is the lesson of obedience. That when we obey what God says and we allow him to have his way, then we don't have to worry about things. But it's when we start to interject our own thought process where the problems actually come. And then there was another part that in the studies it says, um, now go and attack the Amalek. Go and attack Amalek. But God had a special purpose in this for his special nation, Israel. He wanted it to test the obedience of Saul and all of Israel. Plus, since Amalek's sin against Israel was a military attack, God wanted to make the judgment fit the sin. So it was apples to apples. It was not like, oh, I'm just going to come and, oh, no, I'm doing to you exactly what you did to my children. You annihilated them and you caused harm, and I'm doing the same exact thing. Though God no longer causes people to take up arms as instruments of his judgment, it does not mean that God has stopped judging the nations. Now, that brought in the question for me about holy wars, where people are justifying that they're doing a holy war based on what God has said. And then this tells us that he did not call them to do that, but he still has judgment in his own way. And that here again, we might have someone that is taking the Lord's name and intent and using it for personal gain, although they're clouding it with that they're doing it because of God itself. So when we go on, where Saul actually prepares to actually go and strike the Amalekites. And it says that he gathered the people and he numbered them 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul called to the city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. And then at that inside of this place where the Amalekites were, there were the Kenites. And what he said to the Kenites was that you need to depart and come away from them, because this is what's going to happen to them. That basically I'm going to come in and I'm going to destroy them. And but I'm showing you kindness. And if you take my advice, that you will actually get away from them so that you may be spared, or you will be annihilated with them. So he was kind and he showed favor that way. But then when we get down to a little further, it talks about the attack in itself. And he goes in and he does attack the place of the Amalekites. And he attacked them from Havilah and all the way to Shur, and all that was east of Egypt. And he took the king, King Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive. Now that was the first sign that we were having a problem with this. And then it also says that, but he spared the king, the best of the sheep, the best of the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them. Now here's where the problem starts. When God gives us a command or direction to do things, he doesn't need our own interpretation. The message that he was given from Samuel was that he was to go and that he was to kill everything, to destroy everything, not to walk away with anything. But here's where we see that Saul is in his own glory at this point, not for the glory of God, for what it should have been, but for in his own glory. And he came away and he allowed the king to live, which became a big problem because in essence, he dishonored God in his actions. His judgment, reluctantly and without pleasure, longing that men would just really praise him. But it should be that we should always be into a state of repentance before God. Then we go on and it says 10 through 11. Now the word of the Lord came to Samuel saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king. So Saul's actions grieved God's heart. And he really, really regretted what was going on. And Samuel himself grieved because he grieved understanding that the harm that had been done to God. You know, it's like when it says, I greatly regret, it's trying to give a description of how bad God was hurt by the actions of Saul. And he was very, very repentant. And when we figure like this, when we're close to God, when things hurt him, it should hurt us. And things that make him happy, it should make us happy. That if we're in his will, this is what we feel. We feel when he feels. And this is how Samuel was. And Samuel took on and grieved greatly. And he cried all night long about what had taken place because he knew that Saul had stepped outside of the will of God and that it was not something that actually would be pleasing to him. So in 14 through 16, Samuel said, when then is the bleeding, but Samuel said, What then is the bleating of the sheep in my ear, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God. Don't disobey God and then turn around and say, But see, God, I did it for the good. Nobody asked you to be Robin Hood. I gave you a direct order to actually kill and annihilate these people, and it was for just cause. But you decided that you were doing something completely different. And what happened was that your pride got in front of what I commanded you to do, which in essence turned into disobedience, and your disobedience made you blind to the command that I gave you. So Saul is trying to explain to Samuel in all of these essence about, but this is why I did it. And, I'm doing it to the glory of God. I had to do this, but I've taken all this stuff and I've given it back to God. God doesn't want our disobedient sacrifices. When he asks us to do something, that's what he wants us to do, and to actually follow his rules. Be obedient. But here we see a man that had been elevated, that had been chosen because they rejected God as their king and they wanted a king. And this is what they got. And he got to the point where he started to reject God also. So it goes on and it continues. 17 through 21 says, So Samuel said, When you were little in your own eyes, meaning that when you were a nobody at all, were you not a head of tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king of Israel? He gave you all this power. He anointed you and gave you everything. There was nothing for you to worry about. Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners of the Amalekites and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? So he's going on and he's drilling him about, what have you done? Why have you rejected the word of the Lord that had been given to you for the mission that needed to be accomplished? But what we see here is that Saul became very full of himself and felt that he had the availability because he was king, that he could do whatever he wanted to. And he was actually big in his own eyes. Pride took over him. We have to be very careful that when we are going and God is giving us direction, that we stick to what he says. He does not need our dissection or interjection in what he has called us to. We are just to be faithful to those things. Then it goes on to talk about, has the Lord a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice. This is what he's telling him at this point, that it is better that you would have obeyed God than talk about these sacrifices that you're bringing and burning to him. And it says, and to heed that the fat of rams, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Now that was very interesting for me, that whenever we rebel in stubbornness and reject what God says, that it is basically that we are rejecting God himself, and we are serving gods by occult practices or idolatry. And that was a very unique concept to look at it that way, that anytime that we reject what God, or we disobedient to God, that we have to make ourselves subjected to other gods because we're not following him. Then Saul comes at this particular point, and he's talking to Samuel again, and he says, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandments of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voices. So instead of following what God said, he was going along to get along. He wanted to be popular among the people. So he's confessing it here, and he says, now therefore, please pardon my sins and return with me, that I may worship the Lord. So he's asking Samuel to come back in front of all of the people so that it looks like that everything is cool, that God is pleased with what he's done and all these things like that. And when he asked, please pardon me, um, but already, no matter what he tried to do, it's like the sin was against the Lord. So having Samuel show up with you, you should have been worried about making sure that God was good with you. Then it goes in 26:31, it says, Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. And as Samuel turned around to go away, Saul seized the edge of his robe and tore it. So Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And as the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he is not a man, and he should relent, that he should relent. Then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people and before Israel. Saul had not even realized what Samuel told him. It's like, you're ineffective at this point. What you have been covered with, that you've been walking under the covering and the empowerment of God, that you have now caused separation at this point. So that it was just an actual physical example or display just how desperate he had become. But in his desperation, all the damage that he had caused, when we look at the analogy of with the robe that actually took place. And then we see here, it says, and also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent. The strength of Israel actually is referring more so to the Lord. And that's what we're having here. The strength of Israel right now will not relent. So what God said, he meant. So he's not going to change his mind just because you're trying to save face. You should have obeyed me when you had chance. 32 to 33 says, then Samuel said, bring Agnon, king of the Amalekites. I'm going to get that word right. Here to me. So Agag came to him cautiously. And Agag said, surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childrenless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag into pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Now, we know that Samuel was used to giving sacrifices, and he was very skilled with what he was doing. But I imagine just to see him actually go in and actually virtually viciously slaughter this king, that it probably made everybody take pause, that to know that he had been moved to this particular point to actually kill Agag and actually do what he was, he just basically dies. The butchery skills were on that day. So he probably had a large knife and he actually cut him up. And then it says, then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to the house of Geba of Saul. And Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. So in between Ramah and Gibeah, it was roughly about 10 miles. And it was very sad that the way that they had previously been, because of disobedience, that it caused such a rift between them that they never saw each other again. Yet Samuel still grieved for Saul very openly. And we'll start to see what started to happen with Samuel after the fact. So here we see that Samuel goes at this point, and God tells Samuel to go and anoint a new king over Israel. So now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. But the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. You shall anoint for me the one I name to you. So God had a plan that he knew, based on Saul's performance, that he was not his king, and that he had made provisions to anoint the brand new king. Now, we all know a little bit about the story of Samuel coming to the house of Jesse and actually asking for his son. So we'll go a little deeper into that. And then it says, over between 4 and 5, it says, so Samuel did what the Lord said and went to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming. Now, see, whenever the prophets showed up, people shouldn't be just like, oh, yeah. They're trying to figure out what is going on, what word is coming that way. So it was very difficult for them to embrace, but there was a reverence that you knew that this man was carrying a word from God when he showed up in your place. And then it says, do you come peaceably? This is what they're asking. And he said, peaceably I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So he's following to the letter what God has told him to do. And whenever we do that, God makes a way and he provides everything that we need. So we have these people that were once alarmed, they're no longer alarmed. Now, Bethlehem is a small town not too far from Jerusalem, and it is the home of, as we learned last week, of Ruth and Boaz. And we know about the descendants, that Jesse was a descendant of Ruth and Boaz, okay? And then it says, so it was when they came and they looked. Now, here's Samuel coming in now, and he's looking at the sons of Jesse because God has instructed him to go to look at the house of Jesse. So he looks at his first son, and he looked at Eliab, and he was, surely the Lord was going to anoint him. You know, the oldest always carries that kind of weight. So they assumed that was it. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at the appearances or the physical structure, because I refused him. For man looks at the outward, but God looks at the inward. He looks at the heart. Because Eliab was said to be very tall, very muscular physique, and he was very good looking. And he looked like he could be a king. But God said, that's not it. That's not it. And then he went on, and then so he looked at Abinadab, and then he went on from there. That wasn't it. And then he looked at Shammah. These were the three older boys. That this was not it. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. The Lord is very specific when what he wants. He knows exactly what he wants, and he will not compromise. And that's what he asked us to do in our service to him. That when he's looking, when he wants to anoint someone, understand there are no substitutes. This is what it's saying, no substitutes here. And Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? Then he said, there remains yet the youngest, and there he is, keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. So here's the most unlikely. He's the youngest. You could tell the way that they talked about him. He didn't have a lot of a ranking in the family because he was the baby of the family. And they said, oh, he's just out there tending the sheep. That's what he's doing. But yeah, the one over there, that's the other one that I have. But what they did not realize, that in the lesson of tending the sheep, that there was preparation going on. God already knows the plans before they even are revealed to us. But God knows what he's doing. And David was called for this great anointing when he was out keeping the sheep. And David was simply doing the small things faithfully. So this is where we talk about don't despise small beginnings, because you never know, those beginnings of where you're starting at can make you prepared for greater things to come. So he went and brought him, and now he was ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. Now, when they say that they're ruddy, would mean that they're more fair skinned. So, where they're tannable almost, so you know you're kind of light. And with bright eyes, meaning that you were full of vitality and vigor and life. And he was good looking. And he says, arise, anoint him, for this is the one. So, in spite of all of the other things that the other boys possess, here, this little boy is the one that Samuel was told to anoint this one. Then Samuel took the horn of the oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. So Samuel was obedient to the call of God, that when God told him exactly what he was supposed to do, that is what he did. He did not sit and say, well, God, you cannot mean this little kid right here. This is not it. You said you wanted a king. You didn't tell me to go look at, in Romper's room. This is not it. But he followed the direction of God to the letter. And that is what we are often challenged with, is that what it looks like, we may be looking at the outside, but God is looking at the heart of the least to see what's actually going on, because those are the ones that he knows that he can trust, that would move in obedience as he is calling them. So David that day was anointed, but he did not start to serve yet as king. Life just continued to go on for him. But the anointing, now the interesting thing was his family, when he was anointed, they didn't even think anything about it, They were just thinking that maybe it was something divine that he was supposed to be anointed for, but not a king. So nobody really paid attention or gave credence to actually what was taking place. So then when we go into 14, that it actually talks about Saul's distressing spirit troubles him. Now it says, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. So at this point, because before Saul had carried the favor of God, and that he was comforted, that everything that he needed, God would supply. But when his disobedience caused the disengagement of the relationship with him and God, that it was replaced with the distressing spirit. Now, you might have say that if it had to be diagnosed today, it would be diagnosed with some type of mental illness, the way that when I was studying how it was talking about it, because he was troubled. He was uneasy about things and easily agitated about things. These things just would send him into a tizzy about things, and his mind would become overactive. So this is what he was left with because of his disobedience, and the Spirit of God removed itself from him. So once you could feel the comfort and the support, now you're feeling all alone. So he's doubtful of things that are going on and how he's operating. And Saul's servant said to him, surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servant who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful on the harp, and it shall be that he will play it with his hands when the distressing spirits of God is upon you, and you shall be well. So Saul said to his servant, provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me. Now, this is it's the greatest full circle story that you could ever see. Here we had David, that was a little shepherd boy that was really not held in a high esteem. He was the youngest of a family, but he had all these qualities that were going on with him, as that, the isolation and the separation actually prepared him for so much. And as we continue in the story, we'll start to see more about that. Then it says, he went on, and then a man was nominated. It says, then one of the servants answered and said, look, I have seen the son of Jesse, the Benjamite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and handsome person, and the Lord is with him. So they go on and they're talking about David at this point. And David is playing like what they were saying, a harp was more so like it's like a guitar that he's actually playing. But he comes and he calms Saul. He acquired all these skills while he was out being a shepherd, and oftentimes being by himself, and just having to console his own self and comfort his own self when he was out there. So he became very skilled at playing and singing and embracing the aloneness, and knowing how to calm himself through music. So this is where they identify him. But the biggest thing about what they were saying is that the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Okay. And so David actually came, Saul saw him, was very pleased with him, and it all worked out. And he actually chose him to come and to play for him. Then we get to our next actual verse, is that we're in with Goliath. And it says, now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle where they're gathered at Shachshol, which belongs to Judah. They encamped against Shachshol and Azekah and the Ephes Damia. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. And a champion went out of the camp, and the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. It means like he was between 8.5 feet and 9.2 feet. So he was gigantor. And he had bronze helmets on his head. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels. Now remember, when we learned about the shekels that were given to Delilah, which was 1,100, that was 140 pounds. So do the math, make the math, that he's talking about 5,000 shekels. So he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulder. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to the line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servant of Saul? Choose a man for yourself, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servant. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel to this day. Give me a man that may fight that we may fight together. So here we have this gigantor. It's almost like this bully. He's drawing a line in the sand that, hey, you come on out. They're on one side of the fence and the other, and they're both just yakking back and forth. But here he has, basically, you say Debo has come out and he's calling everybody out. He's like, here I am. I'm ready for battle. Where you at? This is in essence what he's talking about. And he's from the city of Gath, where they've known to have gigantor people there. And there were other large people that were actually there. And also with him, there was an armor bearer before him. So he was someone that had been fighting since he was a child. So he was very seasoned in the art of war. So it was somebody that you wouldn't play with, but it caused a lot of fear for the faint of heart. So the faint of heart would have been the first one to fall back. Those that were kind of like with it, they still were very cautious about what was going on because they had to deal with them. But it caused great dismay. And overall, the children of Israel were afraid. They were very, very afraid of what was going on. So David, of the youngest boys, he had been splitting his time between coming and soothing Saul when he had his spells and going back home to watch the sheep. So now we have David coming back, but his dad has actually sent him because three of the brothers has actually gone to become fighters with Saul. So he wanted to check on his sons to know what was going on. So he sent David, and when he sent David out, he says, that because Jesse was advanced in age and he really wanted to know what was going on with his children. And then so he said, take now for your brothers an ephah of dried grain and 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their thousands and see how your brothers fare and bring back the news to me. So he wanted to know how his children were doing. And he sent David, who was, because of his youth, was probably considered non-threatening, and he actually went out. Now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper. Now here you see, David had the heart of a shepherd. He didn't just leave them there, but he left them in the care of others to go care for someone else. Kind of like where he says the shepherd would leave the 99 to go check on the one. This is what he did. We see this is already that the heart of a true shepherd. He understood that they couldn't be left alone. They needed additional coverage, but he would go out and be away from them. And it says, and they took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up a battle array, army against army. So it started to get thick. They were basically jockeying each other because nobody is actually thrown a blow, but they're going back and forth. And so David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers and was talking with them. And he says, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistine. And he spoke accordingly to the same words. So David heard them, and all of the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So they were being pushed into something, but they didn't have courage enough for it. So David is actually experiencing this, and then actually goes on and talks about where Saul, he wasn't brave enough either, but he said to the men that any of the men that were actually able to kill Goliath, that he was making bribes at this point. He said, I'll make you rich. I'll give you my daughter if you can actually kill them. And I'll make your father's house exempt from taxes. So there were benefits in actually killing Goliath. And said, then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is the uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the army of the living God? So David was saying that he's not even under the covenant of God, because we all know that the circumcision was made under the covenant that God gave to Abraham, that every male child had to be circumcised. So he was not carrying the covenant or the power of God on his life. So this is what this signifies when he says that. And for the people answered him in a manner saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. So they were talking about the benefits, all the benefits that would come if you would kill him. Now, Eliab, his oldest brother, he got a little ticked about David asking the questions, and he misunderstood David. But you know how sometimes your older sibling, they'll just try to shut you up, like you just trying to start stuff. I know how you operate. So this is how his brother actually approached him. and he's telling him that you're just trying to stir the pot. What do you really know? You left the few sheep that you have. Oh, you're just the big man. You can come out here and talk about different things. So this is how they kind of shot David down, basically in his speech. It says, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" Then he turned from him towards another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first one did. So they were discounting who David was and what he actually had to add, but actually saying they're afraid. So they're like, "You're over here talking this nonsense, and you're just going to get us in trouble. You're going to get us killed by you want to just see something happening," and really kind of uh, saying that he was inciting things. So this is what's going on at this point. But then it says, "Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they were reported to Saul." So the run and go tell us heard what he said, and so he had to run and tell him. Then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine." Now here's this little young boy, and he has all of these great men with him. Not one person has even accepted all the things that he's giving, the riches, his daughter, their family to be exempt from taxes. But here's this young shepherd boy. And then it says, "And Saul said to David, you're not able to go out against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are all in youth. You too young, dude. Go sit down. Go take a seat." And he, a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went after it and I struck